And so we come to the third layer of people who have contributed to our understanding of person-centred care. And this is the work of Dawn Brooker. She developed the VIPS approach, sometimes called VIPS, but it's VIPS approach. And this is using an acronym that we're all familiar with, VIP and S. What's a VIP? Very important person. So this very important person idea is one that underpins this notion of person-centeredness. This person in our care is a very important person. So let's look at the V, the I, the P and the S. V is for the absolute value of all human beings. No matter what the diagnosis, this person has value. I is for an individualised approach. P is that we take the perspective of the person. And S refers to the social dimension of our relationships with each other. So let's have a look at these in a bit more detail. V is for valuing people. The person has value regardless of their disability, of their age, or of any other characteristic. So what we're doing is we act then with respect. If this person is valuable as a person, for no other reason that they are a human being, then we act in a certain way to them, with respect, with dignity. We offer dignity towards them. No matter how disabled the person is. The person lying in the chair, unable to speak, unable to mobilise themselves, unable to get to the toilet, unable to eat independently, unable to dress themselves, they can't pay tax, they can't remember their PIN number, they don't hold a job anymore. Is there any value to this person? Now some people would say no. No value.
There's still a mother, or a father, or a brother, or a sister.
Yes.
Still
Right. So they still have a relationship with people around them. So they are still a social being, even though they can't speak, perhaps. So what we're saying here in this person-centred approach is that the person who is lying there in that chair has the same value as you and me. That's what's crucial for us here. They have the same value as you and me, regardless of what our society says. Because our society says you have value so long as you can think, so long as you can hold down a job, and if you are an elite athlete. Or if you're on reality television, then you have value.
You contribute to society according to someone's
judgment.
which might be.
So what we're saying in this person-centred approach is very much contradictory to what our society generally says about human value. We're saying this person has value regardless. No matter how disabled they are, no matter how difficult the care. And the difficult part is, how do we retain our sense of this person's personhood when all we can see is disability, when all we can see is his task and difficulty? The person is a social equal regardless of their disability, social equal to us. So how do we speak to them? How do I communicate to that person? Do I communicate as if they're a child, or do I speak to them as if they're an adult? That's our challenge, isn't it? And some staff drop into that treating people like a child, that sing-song tone of voice.
But if Marilyn believes that she is 8 years old, what do? What do you do?
At that point, I will treat her as if she's 8 years old, in the sense that I'll acknowledge that that's how she sees herself. So I'll say, what's that like for you? Something like that. But it's a respectful question
You would still talk.
that never forgets that they are an adult. Yeah, it's a good point. But it's almost like we have to have two awarenesses in our mind. Never forgetting that they're an adult, but at the same time acknowledging that they've moved in the way they see themselves. Yeah.
You still wouldn't talk in a childish manner, I think. You know, like to a child, you said, you want your boo-boo on or something like that. You wouldn't say that to...
Yeah, well that's a very good point. How do we treat children?
Some people speak to kids like that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it just depends on who you are. I know I wouldn't, to an 8-year-old, I wouldn't even, but some people think that.
Yeah. So what we're saying here is that regardless of the age or the disability, we treat this person with respect. And we never forget how this person would want to be treated and responds well now. So, that's our challenge. I is for the individualised approach. We acknowledge that this person is different to us, unique, irreplaceable. And yet, often we try to implement a one-size-fits-all culture of care, where we assume that because she's got dementia, she should be treated exactly the same as everybody else. And sometimes you'll hear staff say with great pride, I treat everybody the same. And you think, oh, okay, well that's obviously that you feel that's fair, that's very good. But what gets lost there? What gets lost is individual. We lose who this individual is because everybody gets treated the same. That's a bit what they call cookie cutter care. Everybody gets stamped the same. So what we're saying here is that's a one-size-fits-all culture, and that's the way we used to do things because it was efficient. Everybody got treated exactly the same. So what we're trying to say here is that we want to emphasise the uniqueness of each person. So if we do that, then we're trying to adapt the care to the person, not the person to the care. The care to the person, not the person to the care. People can adapt naturally, and we do, to institutional forces. When people are admitted to an aged care home, they will adapt to a certain extent. And sometimes they come in too late, really, to adapt easily. Some of them are more impaired than they're able to, that then allows them to adapt. So if they live too long, in a sense, on their own. What we're saying is that this person is unique and different, and they are comprised of all of these different elements. A life story that makes them different and unique. A personality that is different and unique. Physical health, social preferences, and of course, they have a unique set of neurological problems, even though 6 or 7 people may have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, you're going to get a very different way of that disease process showing up in each person, even at a neurological level. Quite diverse. So that's our I. The P is from the perspective of the person. This is an approach that is not just individualised, but we try to appreciate and take into account when we make care decisions the perspective of the person. What do they want? What is going to help them meet their needs right now? How do they usually meet their needs? If they were able to, what would they choose to do right now? They have a valid perspective, no matter how much we might think that perspective is wrong. It might be factually wrong, but it's valid nonetheless. So the fact that somebody thinks they're 8 years old and wants to go home to their mother, is that a valid perspective? Yeah, it's valid, but it might be factually wrong because their mother might in fact be dead. So, and they are clearly not 8 years old, so it's factually in error. But what goes along with this perspective is an emotional state. The person feels a particular way. They have a particular set of needs and wants that go with it. So they have the perspective, but they also have the feelings. And they have the needs. And they have the memories that will go with it. And the person can be trusted to communicate their needs to us. They will tell us. What we have to do is to trust that they are able to do that. Now, some staff do find that particularly difficult, to trust and to believe in the perspective of the person with dementia. And they will actually disregard the perspective of the person with dementia. Disregarding that perspective means that I can then treat them according to how I want things to go, because I don't have to take their perspective into account. Or maybe I just believe that people with dementia don't know what they think, don't know what they want, so I can just put it over there and I can get on with what I want to do. It's much more straightforward, but it's less respectful in the end, isn't it? Because the person is diminished. So what we're trying to do is to provide care from the perspective of the person with dementia. What is this person going to benefit from right now? What do they want right now? And how can I support that person to find out what they want if they can't determine it right at the moment? How can I support them to get to know what they want? Maybe there are some things I can do to help them get to know and understand their own perspective better, so they can become aware of what they want and start to make some choices. It's very easy when you have dementia to be overwhelmed socially by others. This brings us to the S, which is the fourth of our points, the V, the I, the P and the S, VIPs. We are social beings, and in doing our care, what we do is not just provide tasks and achieve hygiene and safety and have somebody well dressed. What we want to do is create an environment where relationship matters. So this is not just about doing good basic clinical care. It's not about giving the right drugs. All of that is necessary, but it's not sufficient. It's part of it, but it's only part. And behaviour problems are not solved by drugs. What we're talking about here is that all human life is about relationships, and attachments are core to these relationships. And recognising that people with dementia create attachments the same way that you and I create attachments. We become involved with each other, connected. We are a naturally connecting species. We make connections with each other. It's what we do. We form relationships from the time we come out of the womb and before. Kalpana, you've been developing a relationship with your little baby. Yeah. She gets to know you. You get to know her. Very special time where the bond of trust and safety is developed as attachments take place. And Kalpana becomes that safety and support and security for that little baby, because she is a trustworthy figure who is meeting the needs of that person. And so for people with dementia whose memory loss creates insecurity around their attachments and their ability to function, they will often want a strong, stable figure to rely on. And so we can become that person for them. But unfortunately we're not taught how to be attachment figures to people with dementia when we're trained, are we? And yet that's what the person with dementia often wants us to be, is somebody stable and trustworthy, who they can rely on, who won't overpower me, but who will enable me to live well and make me feel okay. So that's our social. This is the VIPs. Any questions about the VIPs approach? How are we doing for time?
Yes, 12:30 on the dot.
12:30 on the dot. All right. That might be a good place for us to stop and have a break.
Can I just say something really quickly?
Please, yeah.
With everything that we've been talking about, I'm just going to put it out there that pretty much almost word for word most of what you've just said, I believe that relates to the way we can deal with staff as well. I know the VIPS model, correct me if I'm wrong, is more specific to people with dementia, is that correct?
Yeah.
But a lot of the wording that was used, building relationships, building trust, etc., I was thinking of leading staff and the relationship between staff and their leaders and management as well. So we'll come back to that.
We will. We'll look at that this afternoon. Yeah. Great. All right.